So I was inspired today. I was sent a TikTok video by a follower of an anti-gather advocate talking about livestock on range and how livestock outnumber mustangs 30 to 1 and a bunch of other, little snippets of information. And I ended up doing a comment on there, and then I'm uploading a video reply right now, and it's kind of lengthy. It's a 10-minute video reply, and it's about as short as I could make it to try to get into some of that detail for her on my experience. But I wanted to share with you guys my experience here. I've actually been encouraged by some friends to start writing a book on this, specifically my journey. And that is my journey from being anti-gather to working for the Bureau of Land Management at the Wild Horse Corrals. I grew up in northeastern Washington, and I wholeheartedly believed that there was no reason to gather these mustangs. Why do we need to gather them? There's no point in it. Just leave them alone and they'll be fine. And the way I grew up and where I was at, I didn't even realize mustangs even still existed on range. I did not know that that was still real. I thought that was an old tale of the West until my grandpa had gotten me the documentary on Cloud the Mustang. And I watched that. And of course, that documentary is very biased and it's very anti-gather. And as a young girl, I believed it to be wholeheartedly true. It was a documentary. It had to be true, right? And so I had accumulated different documentaries, different books. When I'd gotten social media, I followed the pages. I argued all the arguments. I tell people all the time, there's not an argument that you can sit there and tell me when I try to present people with information and they turn around and be like, well, this, and this. I tell them, there is not an argument you could sit there and tell me that I have not argued personally myself. And I tell people that all the time. There's not something that you could tell me that you could turn around and try to say, well, this and this. Yeah, I know. I've said that before. And generally, when I tell people that, they turn around and say, well, you drank the BLM Kool-Aid. And I hate it when people say that. I absolutely hate it because I did not move locally to these mustangs and then go to the BLM office and be like, okay, what are you guys doing? As someone who is anti-gather, go to the BLM and be like, okay, tell me what's going on. And then they told me and be like, well, that sounds like a better idea. I'm with you guys now. That's not how it happened. When I moved locally to these mustangs in Eastern Oregon, and to give you guys an idea of how local I live to these mustangs, I say this all the time, which a lot of you probably already know this, but I am within walking distance of 2 HMAs alone. I can walk to 2 HMAs from my house in an hour's time. I am within driving distance, an hour's driving distance, of 15 HMAs in Oregon alone. That's not including Idaho, Nevada, and California, because we're right along the border of each of those states where we live. And once I got here and I started seeing these mustangs year round, I started realizing that everything that I believed to be true wasn't true. And I tell people all the time, and if you guys follow my TikTok or if you follow me on Facebook, whatever, you guys know that I always say it is not about what these anti-gather people are posting. It's about what they're leaving out. They don't give you the whole picture. They don't tell you exactly what is going on. They get a quarter amount of correct information and they put it in there, something that is going to support their ideology and what they're pushing for, so people back them up even more. If you've ever seen that meme on Facebook where it shows the TV screen, and on the TV screen it shows a knife at a person and it says this is the media, and then the real picture of it is a guy like defending himself, and it makes the guy look like that's defending himself is actually hurting somebody else. That is what anti-gather groups do. They give you a little picture of what is there that supports what they're pushing to get more followers, to get more people donating, to get the backup, get the people that are going to file these lawsuits, that are going to call, that are going to harass the BLM saying, don't gather this, don't gather that, leave them alone. They're trying to get like an army built for their cause, and these people are just blindly following them because they believe that everything that they are posting about and everything that they say is the whole story. It's the whole truth. And that's just not the case. A lot of these things that I like to really point out that, when you actually start to do your own research and start to find this out to people, if you just do more research on it and get the whole picture to come to your own conclusion instead of believing this side or this side, you really start to understand what is actually going on. Like I said, they don't give you the whole picture. They give you a little snippet. Here you go, look at this. This is the whole story. Whereas the whole picture that comes together, yeah, that may be a little piece of the story. That may be what is part of it. But if you take that one little picture and crop it, or that one little bit of information, and don't give any more information or any rest of the picture, yeah, that looks awful. That looks really, really bad. But when you look at the entire picture and you realize all of the things that come into play, or look at all of the other information that comes into play with this and come to your own conclusion, you come to realize that these Mustangs need to be managed. They cannot just be left alone on range to fend for themselves and be there. And again, I didn't come to these conclusions. I'm not putting this stuff out there because I drank the BLM Kool-Aid, as people come to tell me after I keep giving them information saying this and this is actually part of that. And when you put 2 and 2 together, part 1, the little part of part 1, yeah, you understand that it makes sense. It's not evil. It's not decimating Mustangs. And then these anti-gather groups, they go after ranchers a lot because they always say that the BLM is siding with ranchers. I can tell you, as a BLM employee, ranchers are pissed at us too. They're not happy. And the BLM is trying to stay in the middle ground between both sides that are mad at them for mismanaging these. It's both for the same thing, for mismanaging. It's just one side says no management and one side says there needs to be more. And so both of the sides are pissed at the BLM for mismanaging these Mustangs. And the BLM is trying its hardest to stay on a middle ground to somewhat keep one side or the other remotely happy. And like I said, I didn't drink the Kool-Aid. I spent 5 years in Eastern Oregon before I come to the conclusion, well, not before I come to the conclusion, but before I started working for the BLM. I firsthand have seen these Mustangs year-round, not just in the spring when they're all slicked off and fat and happy because the grass is growing. I see them in January when they're skin and bones and they're dropping like flies because there was no feed because it was gone in August. I have worked firsthand with farmers and ranchers, finding out exactly how grazing allotments worked. What is the ins and outs of that? What is actually going on? I have worked and talked with range management specialists, people who are the ones that determine, yes, we need to gather these Mustangs, or you need to move these cows because they graze too much grass on your allotment. And if you want to figure out, if you want to get into detail how much, into detail about grazing allotments and cattle and stuff and livestock on range, my previous YouTube video where I talk a lot and get into depth about that. And I'll touch on some of those points, but to try to keep this shorter, I'm not going to get into super depth. This is more of just my story of how I went from being anti-gather to working for the BLM. But there's a lot of information when it comes to grazing allotments that these people leave out, that these anti-gather people leave out. One of the common arguments, which is something this lady talks about in her video, is that livestock outnumber Mustangs on range 30-1. And the thing about that is, yeah, it's true. It is true. But One snippet of information that they're leaving out in that particular comment, when these anti-gather groups say livestock outnumber mustangs on range 30-1, no wonder there's no feed. Well, they fail to leave out the fact that they're comparing 155 million acres of public land that are using for grazing allotments. They're counting all 155 million acres together for grazing allotments and for the numbers of livestock that are out there compared to the 29 million acres that mustangs run on. That is really, really unfair to compare those two numbers when it comes to the number of animals on range. So they're accounting for numbers of 126 million acres that is used for grazing allotments that mustangs are not on. They're counting those numbers of 129 million acres or 126 million acres, counting the numbers of that livestock that mustangs aren't even on those grazing allotments. Those are just public lands that are grazing allotments. There are no mustangs on it, but they're counting those numbers. Can you see there where a snippet of that information can really deter a lot of people from supporting anti-gather causes? When if they were to post something saying the whole truth, livestock outnumber mustangs 30-1 on public lands, but we are also accounting for 126 million acres that mustangs aren't even on, counting the numbers of those cattle. Now, if they were to go and actually run the numbers of what livestock actually run on for the 29 million acres that do actually, in the instance they do run in common, they're actually going to find out that mustangs outnumber livestock when it comes to the instances that they're running in common. Another piece of information that they leave out when they talk about everybody assumes that mustangs run in common on every single HMA with livestock. That's not true. It's a very rare instance. And if you go to my Facebook page or something, go to my Facebook page, I actually wrote up an article, and basically the same thing of what I talked about in my previous video about grazing allotments and cattle and why removing cattle off of public lands is not a feasible option. But in that post, it's basically I shouldn't say watered down, but simplified version of that I made. And it has pictures. I have pictures that I had overlaid the maps of the HMAs and the grazing allotments over the top of each other for western states, and you can actually see that it's not that common. I mean, there is instances, yes. There is places where livestock and mustangs run in common, but it's not as common as everybody thinks it is. It's another piece of information that they leave out. They never take those maps and overlay them like I did to show, here you go, these are where they run in common. But in the instance that they do run in common, I touch about this in my last video, or I talk about this, I shouldn't say touch, I get into detail about this. A lot of people don't understand that these cattle ranchers pay for their allotments. Everybody says they're welfare ranchers. It's either corporate ranches running off, trying to take over public lands, or it's welfare ranchers that are using the land for free. And so they go both ends of the spectrum with that. Either it's a big corporate ranch bribing the BLM to use public lands and decimate the mustangs, or it's welfare ranchers getting to use the land for free. And so there's two contradicting arguments that they have there with each other. And one thing that I talk about, that ranchers have to pay for these allotments. They don't get to use them for free. Ranchers only get to run cattle or livestock on these allotments for a certain amount of time. These allotments are even broke down into pastures, sections. The allotment is this big, but it's broke down into each section. And each section, their livestock is only allowed to graze for a certain amount of time. In that entire time that they're on that certain section, the BLM or the Forest Service goes up and they monitor how much that cattle or that livestock is grazing, and say that they get to use the first pasture of this entire section right here. Say that they're up there And they say, okay, June 30th, you could ship cattle or livestock up here and be on this allotment. June 30th, you have it through July 10th, July 14th, about 2 weeks maybe. That's the time that you could be in this little pasture. When you're in that little pasture, at your done date, July 14th, you have to have all of your livestock gathered out of this little section and move it to this section. You can't move it down to this section. You can only go to this section next. And so you have to have all your animals removed from that section and move it to the next. But if the BLM or the Forest Service goes up and does their monitoring, and they go up there and they monitor the high traffic for a lot of grazing areas, around riparian areas, creeks, water sources, all of that. They go up there, they measure the grass, they do an assessment, and if they go up there and say, well, we were giving you 2 weeks in this, but your cattle have actually grazed, or your livestock have actually grazed down more than they should, so we're going to cut the time that you are allowed in this section by a week, and so now you have to move them over to the next section. Which means this next section, that doesn't mean they get to stay there for 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks. That just means that they get 2 weeks here, and that means a week is cut off their total time of being up there. It doesn't mean that, it gets moved around. And even if it's the other way around, if they go up there and the 2 weeks is up and the range con or range management person goes up there and monitors the grass and they realize, well, your cattle haven't grazed as much as we anticipated, that doesn't mean that they go, well, now you get to stay an extra week. You still have to, even though there's plenty of feed there, you still have to move your livestock over to the next pasture. And this entire section is only used for a certain amount of time in the year. It's not used year round, and they don't just dump their livestock out there and be like, all right, see you later. We'll come and get you later when we need to, butcher something. No. It's monitored. It's watched very closely, and the rangers have to do what the BLM says, or the Forest Service, because if they don't, numbers get cut or their permit gets taken away. And that's stuff that all these anti-gather groups leave out. They make it sound like that livestock run on every single HMA in common. Livestock outnumber mustangs 30-1. Livestock are out there year-round, and a rancher is not paying for it, or it's big corporate ranches bribing the BLM. They take out these little snippets or little just could be true things and put it out there for people, and to gain more support, more followers, build their little army to go against the BLM. These are all things that I started to realize when I moved up here to Eastern Oregon. These are the things that I started finding out doing my own research in person. I wasn't Googling it. I wasn't getting on Google and do. Once in a while I'll get on, like if I forget a number, like beginning of this video, I was like, okay, I can't remember. In my TikTok video that I posted doing a reply to this lady, I said almost 200 million acres of public lands are grazing allotments. And then I was like, I think it's less than that. So I did look on Google to remind myself exactly what number it is of how many acres it is. X 155 million acres that are public lands that are grazing allotments. So I will occasionally go onto Google and refresh my memory when it comes to numbers. But when it comes to how grazing allotments work and stuff like that, all of that I've learned is from working with ranchers hand in hand. All of that I've learned is in-person experience. Coming to this conclusion myself, not getting online, not Googling this, and this, and finding it out. When I find these things out, and I make educational video replies on TikTok and stuff, I will Google something to show people this is what you do. But the thing that I found out about Google, too, is that Google keeps we all know that Google keeps track and tabs on what you search. You look up scented candles on Google or Amazon using your browser, and now you got scented candles on your Facebook page. We all know that stuff happens. If you go to Google, I can't remember how you get there, but Google has a list of stuff that has come to assumptions about you: your age, where you live, what you do for work, how much money you make. This is in your Google settings. You can find this out. Like, if you click around it in your Google settings, in your Google account, it has all these assumptions of what you do for work, your age, how much money you make based on your shopping or what you're Google researching to buy. It has a lot of stuff that it has accurate assumptions about you that even my closest friends and family don't know. They don't know how much I make a year. Google does, based on my search history. Google knows a lot of stuff about you based on what you research or base what you look up. And so when you're looking up stuff on Google, they start kind of like how the TikTok algorithm works. You're scrolling through TikTok on your For You page, you like certain videos, or you sit and watch certain videos all the way through. You notice those type of videos start popping up more and more often in your feed. The algorithm creates a For You page that is basically specifically designed for you based off of what you watch and what you're interested in, what you post, what you hashtag on your videos. Google does the same thing. And so when you go to type in home decor, if I were to go in and type in home decor on Google, it's going to give me a lot of Western home decor ideas, because Google already knows that I Google a lot of Western type stuff when it comes to clothing, when it comes to shoes, when it comes to tack. They already know that I'm involved in the horse industry. It's on my Google assumptions. So when you Google stuff, and this kind of, I know this is coming across as conspiracy theory stuff, but honestly, look this up. Get into detail, figure out this stuff, because it's true. So when you Google stuff, if Google already knows that you're Googling articles about anti-gathering cattle, anti-gather, what cattle allotments and stuff like that are, numbers of cattle, all the stuff that I previously mentioned in this video. When you look up just a phrase that is unbiased, they're going to give you a preference to what you've already Googled and looked up. And so some of these things that you Google, like if you Google, so for me, I'll give you an example. So for me, when I try to Google, were horses here in the United States prior to the Spanish? Because a lot of people are arguing that horses were here prior to the Spanish reintroducing them to the United States. If I Google that, I get a bunch of history stuff saying Spanish reintroduced the horse in around the 1500s. Spanish this, they landed here, they came here, they brought it from here. If someone who is anti-gather researched that, they're going to get articles about, well, there's assumptions that horses were actually here prior to the Spanish reintroducing the horse. So you can Google the exact same question and get different results based on your Google history. And so that's why a lot of the time I don't really recommend a lot of people just Google it. Because Google will give you preferences. Google is not a 100% reliable resource, because you can literally Google, is coffee good for you? And you're going to get pages and pages of articles on how coffee is going to benefit you health-wise. And then if you turn around and Google, is coffee bad for you? You're going to get the same thing, pages and pages of why coffee is bad for your health. Google is going to support and give you, just like the TikTok algorithm, based off of your search history. The internet these days is based around creating the best internet experience for each individual person. Spotify does it. They keep track of which artists, which songs that you like, and they make recommendations on, hey, you enjoyed Dave Stamey, why don't you check out Ian Tyson? Whereas if you listen to pop country or pop, they're going to be like, oh, hey, you like Miley Cyrus? Why don't you check out X on Spotify? Your internet experience is based around now, the technology now is based around creating the best experience and creating the easiest experience and most enjoyable experience to each individual person. Each one of your apps does that. On Facebook right now, Facebook does the same thing with your page. I have had to set good friends and family as favorites so they show up on my page. If they don't post that often, like my husband, if he posts something, he doesn't post very often. He's my husband. But when he does post, I don't see it on Facebook because he doesn't post very often, and I'm liking the people that come up all the time. I'll like their picture, like their thing that they shared and stuff like that. So those names show up all the time on my Facebook feed. Whereas if my husband were to post, the last time he posted, over a month ago, I liked his picture, but he doesn't post very often. So his name doesn't even come up on my feed when he's posted it. I have to go to my husband's Facebook page to see what he has posted or set them as a favorite so that when he does post, it comes to the top of my feed. Everything that you do these days is based around individual experience and making it just customized to each individual person. So that's why I don't recommend using social media or Google necessarily all the time to do your own research on it. I always recommend go out and do the research in person. And that's why I tell people all the time when they're trying to argue with me on social media and I try to point out some facts and stuff like that. And they'll be like, don't just go and Google it, because when you go and Google it, it's going to show you what you want to see. This is exactly what it's going to do. I've even had trouble with Google knowing me as well as it does, finding certain facts that I already know to be true to show people online. Be like, okay, well, let me look up this. And so if you Google a map correlated, overlaid over the top of each other of HMAs and public livestock grazing areas, Google will not show you a map that's overlaid showing HMAs and public livestock grazing. You have to go and do it yourself. That is how I've come to these conclusions. That is how I have gone from anti-gather to working for the BLM. Is putting in extra effort when it comes to my research. Making sure that the research that I find is not a biased article, but something that is actually scientifically written by a well-renowned school or something like that. Not a biased article that is written by somebody, because again, if you go and try to look up do cattle damage the ground, if you are anti-gather and if you Google is cattle damaging to the environment, you're going to get all sorts of biased articles about how the way that cattle eat, and they're going to explain it in a way that the way that these cows eat is extremely detrimental to the land, that they're damaging creeks and lakes and stuff because of the way that their hooves are. But if I were to Google that, because Google knows me, it's going to tell me how all the things that cattle actually benefit with scientific articles to back it up. But in that instance, it's not just me Googling stuff like that to show people. I don't just like, cattle aren't damaging lands, and then Google it and then pick the first article that shows up. That is firsthand experience from working on ranches. If you were to go out, or let's say if I were to have 2 5-acre parcels, you were to put a horse on one and a cow on the other and leave them on there with no supplemental feed, the results are going to show you for itself exactly which one is actually more damaging to the land and what is hurting the land more. It's going to be the horse, just from firsthand experience, from seeing it myself, from seeing 50 cattle on 20 or 50 acres and 10 horses on 50 acres. Those 10 horses are going to do more damage to that land than the cattle, because I have seen it firsthand. If you drive down the 205 going up to the Steens HMA, if you drive down the 205, a lot of the pastures on each side of the road are BLM cattle grazing allotments. You get to the wildlife refuge here, the Mount Hero Wildlife Refuge. ranchers in the wintertime, it is a grazing area for cattle. They turn their cattle out on that refuge. They pay for those permits to have their livestock on that allotment. If you drive down and look at the refuge and keep an eye on it, you could see, wow, there's actually really, like, even the next spring, drive down in the spring when the grass is growing. That looks really good. Like, the ranchers hay it before they turn their cattle out on it. And then they turn their cattle out on it to graze it in the wintertime. It's their winter grazing ground. And you look at that and say, okay, that has not only had X amount of cows on it all winter long, but also it's being hayed. It's got enough regrowth to be hayed to feed other cows. And then you get up to the Steens, and you get to that right where the Steens HMA starts, past that Rock Creek Lane, and you look out in that Hollywood pasture. It is dirt and sagebrush. There's no cattle on that HMA. And some people are going to argue that, well, I was up there and I did see cows. Yeah, because there are parts of that HMA within that public land that is privately owned by ranchers. And their cows are on the privately owned section that they're actually still letting those mustangs come on and graze, because they can't do anything about it. They can't manage those mustangs. They can't help if they go through the fence and get in with their cows. So the mustangs are impeded on private land, not vice versa. And that's another thing that those anti-gather people leave out when it came to the Steens HMA, because of so many people believe that cattle ranchers say, because you could see, if you go online, you look, you can see that cattle have not been allowed on the Steens HMA since, like, I want to say 2017 or something like that. It's been some amount of time. I can't remember the exact amount of time it has been, but it's been quite an amount of time. Cattle have not been allowed on that HMA because the horses have been overpopulated over AML. And so the rancher is not still paying for those allotments, but he's been paying for them for 5-10 years, and no cows have been out there, but he's still paying for it. He puts cows on his private areas, private parcels of land that he has within that public land, but he's not putting them out on the HMA. And that is something that those anti-gather groups were leaving out this year when it came to gathering, or last year when we gathered the Steens. They failed to mention that the areas that you're seeing those cattle are actually private land. They just said there's cattle on the HMA. They did not say that the cattle is actually on private land, and that private land is within the HMA. So all of these things that I have come to the conclusion with isn't because I had just done online research. It's all because I have firsthand worked with ranchers and figuring out how livestock allotments work. I have firsthand talked with RangeCon and range management people, figuring out the ins and outs of that. I have gone and worked with it. Well, now I work for the BLM, but gone to the BLM and seen how things are done, seen how they take care of these horses, what the ins and outs are, and come to my own conclusion. These are all conclusions that I came to before I ever even applied to work at the BLM. And these are all things that I had changed my mind when I started figuring all of this stuff out on my own, because I went out there in person and I started figuring this out. There's another lady that has kind of a similar story to me on Facebook. Her name's Lona Patton. She's a photographer, and she takes a lot of pictures of Mustangs out on range. And she set out with kind of the same mentality I did except she didn't. The difference between her story and mine is, for one, she doesn't work for the BLM now. But for two, when I started noticing inaccuracies or left out, not the whole picture, that's when I started doing my research. Lona went out to do the research to support her cause of anti-gather. She was a pretty decent anti-gather advocate. And she went out, and I wouldn't say that she necessarily set out with the purpose to prove the BLM wrong, but she went out to do her own in-person research so that she could support her statements, back her statements up when it came to gathering Mustangs. Because one of the things that she was so adamant about is that Mustangs could be regulated, for one, or that mustangs would be managed basically by predators, that the predators would manage the mustang population. And what she came to find is that neither of those are true. And it was pretty quickly that she went from anti-gather to pro-gather very quickly when she started going out to find these things out for herself to support her own ideology that she believed when it came to anti-gather. And she ended up proving herself wrong. And so now Lona is actually pro-gather, and she advocates for the gathering of mustangs the same way that I do. So we have kind of a similar story there, except I started noticing inaccuracies and wanted to find out my own information when it came to anti-gather, where she was anti-gather and wanted to prove it even more so right, which she come to find out that it was wrong. And a lot of people don't understand that. And I tell people that all the time when we're getting into discussions and stuff like that, where I tell them, like, I didn't, because they always, when I start putting facts out there, start stating this, start stating that, they turn around and they get mad and they say, well, I see that you drank the BLM Kool-Aid. I'm like, that's not true. That's always somebody's go-to with me when it comes to when I say that I was anti-gather and now I'm not, that I support gathers, that I advocate for gathers. Lona and I did not rely on the internet for our resources. We did not rely on biased pages or groups or articles to support what we were arguing. We wanted in-person experience. We wanted with our own two eyes to tell people, yes, I did see this. I have documented that. I have pictures of that. To show people I went out with my own two eyes, except I was going to find the inaccuracies when it came to anti-gather. Lona went out to find the truth, and she did find the truth, but it's not what she expected the truth to be. And people don't understand that. And I tell people all the time, have you noticed that people that live locally to these mustangs, people that are local to them, are pro-gather? Even, and a lot of people always say, well, yeah, because most of them are ranchers. No, if you go into the town of Burns, there's people that live out here in French Glen that aren't ranchers. They live out here in French Glen. They have nothing to do with ranching. And they support gathers. They support the reason why. And my mom, first time I brought my mother out when I had started working at the BLM, her and I went out to, I took her to the Steens HMA, and it was December. And my mom knows absolutely nothing about horses. My mom is one of those people that if she knew how to work social media, she would probably be supporting anti-gather due to what they are posting and what they are sharing and leaving out the whole picture. And my mom, you know, she believes me for my word. So she wasn't anti-gather when I brought her out. She had an understanding of basically kind of why I, you know, when I explained it to her, what is going on. But, you know, she just kind of was like, okay, well, that's what you do for a living. You know, for horses, I'll take you for your word. And my mom is, because of that mindset, she is the exact type of person that these anti-gather people target and get behind them. People that don't know much about horses, that don't live locally to them, to support their cause. Most of these people that are hardcore anti-gather advocates and supporters, people that live over in eastern states. Have you ever noticed that? Or people that live in major cities that don't go out. And in the instances that they do go out to these HMAs, they're going out when it's convenient for them. You know, springtime. Horses are all slicked and shed out and pretty. Their coats are shiny. The grass is green. It's going to make a really cool picture to post on Facebook and say, I saw Shaman up here on the hill and he's all fat and happy and slicked out and looking majestic and beautiful. And they go out when it's convenient for them. I don't ever see these anti-gather people going out up on the Steens HMA right now. I haven't seen any pictures of anti-gather people posting saying, I went out to the Steens and those horses look fine. Why? Why aren't they doing it? Let me ask you that. And if you haven't noticed, like, there was a huge thing right after the Steens HMA was gathered. There was a lot of anti-gather people showing up there and taking videos of these horses within a couple weeks of them being gathered, showing that they're skinny, that the BLM's not taking care of them, that some of them are limping, some of them are this, but if you haven't noticed, there hasn't been anyone out to the corrals recently to take pictures and videos of these horses. Why is that? It's because all these horses are fat now and they look really good. How is that going to support their cause when they go to the corrals and they post a picture of a horse that is fat and in really good body condition with feed in front of them? I have literally watched Facebook Lives of anti-gather groups. They showed up to the corrals and they took a video from the hill. And of course, since they're on Facebook Live, they're on a cell phone. Keep that in mind. And there was a mare there that was sorted out because this was after the Palomino Buttes gather last year. There was a mare and a foal that was sorted out in a separate pen away from all the other horses. And what they were claiming on there is saying that who knows why the BLM sorted out this mare. You know, they separated her from her friends and her family. She's here by herself with her foal. It makes no sense. Telling this huge sob story, trying to get people to make assumptions on why the BLM is being so cruel to this mare. She made a claim that there's no feed or water in the pen with that mare either. That lady knew there was feed and water in that pen. The hay was right along the fence line. She was standing at the fence. So when you pan across the pen and the feed is at your feet, I can tell you right now, I don't have any legs. I'm paralyzed. My legs got chopped off in a horse accident. From this video, for people who don't know, yeah, they can make that assumption. But if I were to take this camera and point it down, that would go against everything I just told everybody, right? That's exactly what was happening during that Facebook Live. She also said that she had no water as she was panning across this pen that this mare and foal were in. She conveniently stopped right here. And if she would have panned to there, you would have seen the automatic water trough that was right on the side of that pen along the fence. But for some reason, as she's panning across the fence line, she stops right there, saying there's no feed that's out of view down here. There's no water that's out of view right there. Saying who knows why this mare was separated. Trying to get people to make assumptions that the BLM is cruel and that we separated her from her family. That mare had pigeon fever and had a huge blowout in her chest, and we were trying to prevent it from spreading throughout the corrals. But she didn't show a picture or a video of that horse's chest showing that massive abscess blowout either. After that, she had panned out to the corrals and zoomed in on her cell phone. Like I said, that's an important thing to remember. Zoomed in on her cell phone, saying, as you can see here, there's no feed or water for all of these horses in this corral. But if you know anything about horses, you would have seen horses lined out with their heads down. What does that mean for horses? They don't just stand with their nose in the dirt. Why were all these horses in a line with their heads down? It's because they were eating hay, but because she was taking that Facebook Live on a cell phone, it was pixelated and it blended in with the ground and you couldn't see it. I drove around the corrals. I took pictures with timestamps of all of the feed that these horses had at the end of the day. They get fed in the morning and they get enough feed to last them until the next morning. And so I went around and I took pictures of all the pens that she claimed that didn't have any feed, and I posted them with a timestamp showing that I was there about 20 minutes after she was. All my comments were deleted, and I was personally blocked from that page. Why would an anti-gather page delete and block me for making those comments? And I didn't make any rude remarks or anything like that. I just said that I was there shortly after her, on her Facebook Live, and I said, and I saw that these pens all had feed. Every single one of them all had hay in front of them. And those comments were all deleted and blocked. And I was blocked. I can no longer see that anti-gather page. Why? I cannot tell you how many times, and this started early on when I started finding out my own research, when I started doing stuff, and I was simply asking questions. Simply asking questions. For example, just like I said, that argument for cattle and livestock outnumber mustangs on public lands 30-1. I have been blocked for simply asking the question, can you tell me if that is all 155 million acres of public land grazing allotments compared to the 29 million acres? Or is this the actual numbers for the 29 million acres that mustangs are on? And the even smaller amount of acreage that they very rarely run in common. Just for asking that question, deleted and blocked. No answers. Comments deleted, I'm blocked. And I know that my comments were deleted because I have friends that would go to that page after I got blocked. I would ask them, can you go to this and see if my comment is there? And they would go through the comments and they say, there's no comment from you. Simply for asking a question like that. Why would I be deleted and blocked from that page for asking, are you comparing the entirety of 159 million acres, or are you a public grazing allotment, or is this solely for the actual amount of acreage that they run in common? Deleted and blocked. I have been deleted and blocked probably from 15 anti-gather groups and pages just simply for asking questions. I've never been rude and be like, you guys are wrong, you're spreading propaganda, and get all up in arms. I simply just post a picture that shows exactly the whole story, and I get deleted and blocked. Or I simply ask a question for more information and they get deleted and blocked. Why? Because it doesn't support what they are pushing on people. So going back to, sorry, I kind of went off on a rabbit trail there. Going back to when I took my mom up to the Steens HMA. My mom, like I said, doesn't know anything about horses. She takes me for my word and what I say because she knows that I know a lot about horses. She doesn't know, she's terrified of them. She knows that horses eat hay and you got to trim their feet. And she only knows that because I had a horse growing up and she had to pay for the hay in the farrier. That's the only reason why my mom knows that. So she takes me for my word. And so when I took her up to the Steens HMA in December, my mom was almost in tears looking at those Steens horses. And she said, why are we not doing something about this? Why are we leaving these horses out here? Why do they look like that? She's like, if that horse was in my backyard, I would be in prison for it, for animal neglect and abuse. Why are we leaving it? They don't deserve this. And my mom knows nothing about horses. That's all it took for my mom to be 100% and be like, no, I'm not just taking you for your word. I've seen it with my own eyes. I know nothing about horses, but I know that is wrong. My mom is the ideal person that these anti-gather pages are looking for to support their cause. They don't live locally to these mustangs. They don't see them. They can see them on social media that they posted this pretty picture and say that these people know about horses. They obviously know what they're talking about. I'm going to support that. I'm going to get up in arms. I'm going to harass the BLM. I'm going to call the state office and I'm going to say, stop this. And these are all things that I have learned personally. These are all things that I have encountered with my own two eyes. This isn't internet research. This isn't Googling this or that. This isn't, I did this or that. This isn't, I messaged this page, this anti-gather page. This isn't, I looked up this bias article. This is all with my own two eyes, with my time, my spare time, my free time, the past 7 years of my life, accumulating research, accumulating with my own two eyes what I see living amongst these mustangs, what I have seen, and how I have come to these conclusions, and how I ended up working for the BLM at the Wild Horse Corrals because I support it. I want to be that difference. I want these horses to thrive. And prior, I was against the BLM. I saw no reason for it to happen. I saw no reason why we should be doing that. Leave them alone. They are fine. And I can tell you, with what I have seen from my own two eyes, they are not fine. Over the past few years, I have written numerous articles for multiple different aspects of what is the truth when it comes to it. The whole up in arms about the Steens HMA. When everybody was saying that the BLM is only gathering that HMA because they want to. They don't need to be gathered. They're not overpopulated like they claim it is. Because a photographer, an anti-gather advocate photographer, went up there and took a picture and said, I don't see 1,200 horses here. Well, did you get off the Steens Loop and walk the entire HMA? Or did you stop in the Hollywood field and take a picture at the one water hole? It's all ridiculous. And so I ended up making a post. And with photographic evidence to prove my claims. My horses are literally across the road from the Steens HMA. Right across the road. Same terrain, same environment, same feed. The only difference between my horses and the Steens horses is because it was a drought, we had an automatic water trough going constantly for when they needed water. That was the only difference between my horses and the horses on the Steens. My horses had like a 100-acre pasture. I'm not quite sure around there exactly how big it is. I had 5 horses on that pasture. My horses were overweight and fat. No salt, no mineral, no extra supplements, nothing. The only difference between the Steens horses and my horses is the fact that they had water. And water is going to make a little bit of difference in a horse's, like, if they're sucked up. But just having water is not going to make a difference between an overweight horse and a horse that is skin and bones. Water's not going to make that much of a difference. Water doesn't build muscle. Water doesn't build fat. Feed does. And there was pictures posted of Copperhead and Wrangler out on the Steens. And they're older Mustangs, but there's multiple pictures posted by Andy Harmon of bands of younger horses that are skinny in July. You do not want horses on the HMA skinny in July. You want them to be looking in good condition. You want them to have a good body score going into November, let alone them being skinny in July. There's pictures of horses that got stuck in mud because there used to be a water hole there and they were trying to get out and get water and got stuck and died because there's no water. There's no feed out there either. And everybody's saying the only reason why the BLM is gathering it, it's just a drought. There's no overpopulation. They'll be fine. Because all these anti-gather photographers are going out and taking pictures of, the Bachelor band that wanders all over the place, that is younger studs that are easy keepers of 3 horses together hanging out, and they look pretty good. And they say, oh yeah, these ones look good. They all look great. But they're not posting pictures of all different types of horses. One of the recent posts I seen was someone talking about some horses in Nevada, I believe. And they posted a picture of a single horse saying that, 5 pictures of this one horse, saying that they all looked fine, that they don't need to be gathered. Well, if they all look fine, how come you don't have 5 pictures of, 20 different horses? Why is it just that one sorrel horse? Why are you only posting pictures of that one sorrel? Like I said, it's about what they're leaving out, not what they're saying. And so I made this post about the difference between my horses, literally, right across the road. not even a mile apart from each, half a mile if that. Right across Highway 205 is my horses. And my horses were obese. And the South Steens horses were all skinny in July. Water's not going to make that much of a difference. It wasn't a drought because my horses looked fine. My horses were all fat and overweight. So if these horses were only skinny because of a drought, why were my horses that were in the same area, basically on that HMA, why are my horses overweight if it was just because it was a drought year? It was because of overpopulation. It's not because these horses had water. It's because there was too many. I guarantee you, if we took 20 more horses and put it in the same pen as ours and they went through the exact same situation with no supplemental feed and just water, our horses would have looked exactly like the Steens horses. Because there's too many horses in that pasture for it to support all summer long, just on the feed that grows there. It would have been the same thing, and I would have had the cops called on me. I guarantee you some tourists would have drove by and said, "Oh my God, look at those horses." I would be in prison right now if I would have put 20 more horses on that pasture and not fed them. Just be like, all right, you guys go live like the Mustangs that are just across the road. I would be in prison right now for the exact same thing that the Mustangs right across the road are going through. These are the things that come together in my mind that changed my mind, that kept me from pursuing being an anti-gather supporter. How I ended up working for the BLM because I got sick and tired of seeing these horses in these conditions. One of the pictures going around, somebody tagged me in it on Facebook and somebody replied to me last night, and I did reply back. But someone asked me what my thoughts was, and it was a picture of these two stud horses fighting. One of them had gotten a cut and it was bleeding, and it looks rough. It's a rough looking picture, that's for sure. And they're saying that the mares are literally across the pen from from the studs. The studs are fighting because the mares are right there, and that the BLM's not doing anything about it. That they're having to euthanize stud horses because of the injuries that they're sustaining from fighting because the mares are right there. There was no evidence showing that any horses have been euthanized. This was all claims. It was one picture of these studs fighting. And everybody is up in arms about these studs fighting because they're next to mares. And I guarantee you they were not next to mares. We're not allowed to keep mares next to studs at the BLM. Common sense. You put them pens down from each other. And those studs were probably fighting over feed. I guarantee you, because you get two studs that want the same pile of hay, they fight. And a lot of people don't think of, like, so many people were so up in arms about these studs fighting, and that is just so horrific and so awful. But they don't see these studs when they come in. We have studs at the corrals right now. There's one that has his ear. He can't put his ear forward. He can't put his ear forward. He can't rotate it forward because he has such a bad old injury that healed up wrong that the skin on his neck is pulling at his ear so he cannot rotate his ear forward. Juniper, I believe he's called, one of the famous Steen studs. He only has one ear. How do you think he got that ear? One ear. Fighting on range. They act like these studs are only fighting because they're at the corrals. Studs die all the time up on range because they sustain such awful injuries and nothing there to help them medically. No doctoring, nothing like that. They act like these studs fighting in the pens is such a horrific thing that it never happens out in the wild. Never happens out on range. We had a stud come in last year from Palomino Butte. His tail was this long. He had a bobbed tail. And that, I guarantee you, that was from a fight. He sustained an injury on his tail and it probably fell off with no medical attention. His ears were mangled. One was half an ear. The other one laid down on his head because the cartilage had been so messed up that his ear was laying down against his face. It was all there, but it was all down, hanging down on his face, just droopy, like a freaking floppy stuffed animal toy. He was gathered like that. He didn't sustain those injuries at the corrals from fighting because he was at the corrals. He sustained those injuries because he was fighting over mares on range. And these injuries, when you have overpopulated HMAs, saw it a lot in these steeds horses because they're so overpopulated that they're over AML by like 3 times what they're supposed to be. I cannot tell you how many studs came into that corrals with horrible injuries. We got one stud there that has a ball of flesh on his neck because it had been ripped up and it didn't heal, so now he's got this giant waddle on his neck. Ranger, there's pictures of Ranger out on range. He's got a massive cut on his jaw, just skin flopped down from fighting. Juniper, like I said, he has one ear. There's lots of stud horses that came in, and one of them that was even adopted yesterday, and he was a gelding now, but he had chunks missing out of his ear. He was only a 5-year-old. He shouldn't have, he didn't have any serious injuries, but majority of the 5-year-olds, like, yeah, they'll have nicks and scrapes and stuff like that, but around that age, they shouldn't have parts of their ears missing because they're fighting. A lot of these studs that came in with injuries due to fighting is because they were overpopulated and in too close of counter with other stud horses in their bands. So they're constantly fighting each other because they can't get away from each other. You got bands everywhere. This one comes and fights with this one, and it's like, oh crap, well, I lost that. I gotta move this way. Well, guess what? There's another band right here with a stud. You're gonna fight that one too because you can't get away from that one. So they're constantly migrating from band to band and countering band to band, fighting and fighting because there's too many of them. It should be able where these Mustangs, there's a band. And they enter, wander around. They have their territorial areas. They may go and share the same water hole or kind of integrate once in a while, and then they fight then, over mares if there's a mare in season or someone tries to come in and steal their mares. But it shouldn't be constantly fighting here, fighting here, fighting here, fighting here. These bands should be able to cover enough country to where they're not having to constantly fight other studs because everywhere they go, there's another band because there's too many horses. This is all stuff that I've seen with my own eyes. This is the stuff that I set out to find the truth. And this is how I ended up working for the BLM. From being anti-gather. This is how it happened, by seeing all of this with my own 2 eyes. And I have started telling people that are sitting there that are just so adamant on anti-gather. I'll go on their Facebook page and I'll see, oh, well, that guy's from freaking New York. And I'll ask him, when's the last time that you went out to an HMA in in December? Well, I've never been out to an HMA. So how can you take everything that you believe as gospel if you haven't seen it with your own eyes? There's 2 sides to every story. Just like when a couple breaks up, if they have a bad breakup, the guy is saying this and the girl is saying this. The guy's saying that she's evil, the girl's saying that he's evil, and that they both just screwed each other over and ruined each other's lives because they're both just manipulative, toxic people. But if you're friends with both of them and you know both of them really well, you could say, no, you, sir, were not very good to her. And you were manipulative. Put 2 and 2 together, you guys were both toxic. I see the whole picture here. You see that they were bad, and you see that they were bad, and both of you are saints. There's 2 sides to every story. And you can't take the internet as gospel when it comes to these anti-gather pages. And I always say to people, anti-gather is literally spewing propaganda to people. They show you what is going to fit their ideology. They literally have groups on Facebook dedicated to these wild conspiracy theories due to the Steens HMA and the BLM euthanizing Cremello horses. Massive, like, groups based on, oh, well, we didn't actually euthanize them, we just loaded them up in a truck and sent them to Mexico. There's all these people believe all of this stuff, and there's literally no evidence in any of these posts that they make in these groups backing up their claims. It's all just claims, and people follow it, and people believe it, saying the BLM didn't actually euthanize them, they just hate Cremellos, and they shipped them off to Mexico to make a quick buck. But there's literally nothing there to prove that. It is literally someone making a claim and then other people taking it and running with it. It's just like when you play the telephone game. You all sit in a line and you start at one end and you say, psst, 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 I bought a cat with $4. And then that person whispers it to the next person. And at the end it says, I ate a rat with my mother. These claims just keep going along with these people, and they keep exaggerating and make it worse and worse and worse, and people believe it, and they just follow it with literal zero evidence that it happened. And there's no evidence, there's nothing to back it up, because it didn't happen. Yet there's Facebook groups dedicated to these conspiracy theories, these claims that have just blown up. But if you knew anything about horses and the color genetics of breeding, you would know that there is such a thing as lethal white, and you would know that pure white horses with blue eyes can go blind, are born blind, and have sight issues. White horses were euthanized due to vision issues, being blind or almost totally blind. And all these people are saying that we euthanize these horses just because we hate white horses. Yet we had, I don't know how many from Palomino Buttes that came in that were perfectly fine with their sight. We had a handful of more come in, more than what we euthanized of Cremellos from the Steens. But they're not taking pictures of those ones and posting them because, you know, the BLM is killing Cremellos because we hate them. We hate white horses. So we just euthanize them. But if, you know, you went to the corrals, you would see that there's quite a few of them there. But those ones aren't posted. Those pictures aren't posted of those Cremello horses. Because we, you know, kill them all. Go out there and see for your own eyes. That's what I did. And that's how I came to this conclusion. There's so many things, so many things. I've seen anti-gather people come out and they'll take pictures at the corrals and videos, and they'll post them, getting people riled up and supporting them and donating money and go and get that horse, it needs to be saved. There's video of a horse walking of like a 5-second clip, and it looks like the horse is lame. But if that 5-second clip would have actually been twice as long, 10 seconds even, just 10 seconds, you would see that that horse stepped on a rock. And just like, you know, you would. Doesn't make you lame for life. But that little snippet of that horse taking that bad step and posted got a lot of people riled up. How come that video was cropped down to that 5 seconds? I wonder. Because it doesn't fit ideology, it doesn't fit what they're pushing. That's why. I don't wonder, I know. You gotta think of those things. It's not about what they're posting, it's about what they're leaving out. They're not showing you the whole picture. And that horse was perfectly fine. And it happens all the time, just like the story I told earlier about the lady doing the Facebook Live. There's a reason why that she didn't take her cell phone in. There's no feed. Oh. There's no feed. There's no water. Stop. No water. Oh, there's water. Why are they leaving out information like that? Why? Why is there pictures and their videos generally of one good-looking horse out on range, saying that all the horses look fine, but yet there's only pictures of a single horse? If all of the horses look fine, why aren't you posting pictures of 40 horses that look fine? It doesn't fit what they're pushing. That doesn't, if you were to take that video and pan and show the water, if you were to take that video and point it down and show the feed that is right at your feet, that pile of hay, that's not going to get supporters. That's not going to get people calling the BLM saying that they're evil and they need to stop. It's not going to get people harassing the BLM and their family for being evil. Because when you say that there's no feed and there's feed right there, people are going to be like, well, you said there's feed. No feed. And there's literally hay right there. That's like me getting up and going, guys, I can't walk, I'm paralyzed. Hold on. Let me go get a drink. If I said that, if I did that on camera for all of you guys, and was trying to get supporters and be like, you guys, I was in a tragic car accident because of this guy. He was driving recklessly and he ran into me. And now I am paralyzed and I need your support. I need you to go to the law. I need you to back me up. I need you to send me donations so that we can get this right. We can support this cause. You could, get justice. We need justice for this guy who done me wrong. I'm paralyzed from the waist down and I want justice because this guy ran into me and now I'm paralyzed. And then I get up and walk off. And then you turn around and you see the news story or you know that guy and you're like, well, Sarah, you ran a red light. That's why he ran into you. You're not paralyzed from the waist down. You don't need supporters. If you were to just look into it and be like, yeah, why are you only telling part of the story here? That makes absolutely no sense. Why are you telling everybody that you're paralyzed and you got up and walked off a camera? But if I came on here every month and I told you guys that I was paralyzed and told you this tragic story about this guy hitting me and I wanted justice and that I need support, I need people calling law enforcement, I need you to call the state, I need you to back me up, I need donations, I need lawyers, and I need donations for those lawyers to file lawsuits because this guy ran into me and now I'm paralyzed. And then every time at the end of the video I got up and walked off. Is that going to get me supporters? Is that going to get me people calling and being like, we need justice for Sarah. She was cruelly treated and she needs justice. She needs money. She's going to sue. She's going to do all of this. But if I were to turn around and get up and walk off a screen, people are going to be like, what the hell is this lady talking about? Or if it actually did happen, look up the article or look up the news report or police report on it and be like, Sarah ran a red light and she got a bruise on her hip. The guy hit her because she ran a red light. Now she's telling everybody that she's paralyzed. She needs donations to pay for lawyers. She needs people to call the state for justice. When she's the one that ran the red light, it's not the guy's fault because she was in the wrong. And now she wants donations and justice for claims that she is saying that aren't true. That's exactly what these anti-gather people do. They make claims. They tell people these claims. They don't show you the whole picture. They get people rallied to support a cause, to get donations so that they can pay for lawyers, so they can file lawsuits. And yet they're leaving out the whole picture because the whole picture supports their claim, or the whole picture doesn't support what they're advocating for. This is why I set out to find everything out myself. And like I said, I didn't go directly to the BLM. I didn't move to Eastern Oregon and be like, Well, these Mustangs are skinny, so I'm gonna go talk to the BLM real quick and find out what they do. And they go, well, we gather them because there's too many. And I go, oh, well, that makes sense. I'm part of the BLM now. I support you guys. It's not what happened. This is 7 years of me seeing it with my own eyes in person, talking with farmers and ranchers, talking with the BLM prior to working for the BLM. I wouldn't have just blindly gone and worked for the BLM after just being like, oh, I support you guys now, I'm gonna come work for you. No. 5 years of seeing all of this stuff with my own eyes, figuring out how everything works, talking with farmers and ranchers, talking with range cons, range management specialists, all of that in person, face to face, working on ranches, managing those allotments, seeing those Mustangs from January 1st to December 31st with my own eyes. These conclusions are all of this information, all of this stuff that I tell people is not internet based on this is what I Googled and this is what I found off of biased articles, off of from whatever side, biased articles based favoring the BLM or biased articles favoring anti-gather. This is all stuff that I came to with my own conclusion, my own research, my own in-person, real-life interactions, not only talking with people, but working for ranchers, managing those allotments, understanding how they work by not only talking with the rancher on how much they cost, what is going on, AML, how many AUMs, all of that, talking with the rancher, each individual rancher, talking about what has happened in their experiences with running cattle or livestock on public lands. What all entails there. I lived it. I've done it. That's how I know. Not because I Googled it, because I done it. I don't come to the conclusion that these Mustangs are skinny because the BLM, are skinny because of drought. I know it because my horses across the road were fat. They're overpopulated. There's too many horses and not enough feed. And it's not because of a drought. It's because there's 600 more horses than there's supposed to be there. They would have looked that way whether it was a drought or not. And unfortunately, because there's 600 more horses on the Steens HMA, we didn't gather and get those horses down to AML. There's still about 150, 200 more than there's supposed to be. But I'm betting due to the fact that there was 600 more horses than what that land could actually support, and they were skinny in July, that by the end of winter, we're going to be below AML. And that is not because the BLM gathered them. That's because they died. They starved to death and died because of it. And that right there makes me sick, because no horse deserves that. No animal deserves that. These Mustangs are a huge part of our American history. And I tell people all the time, because they always get so mad at me for being pro-gather. You just hate these Mustangs. I love them. That is why I have Mustangs. That's why my house is a shrine to my Mustangs, because I love them. These horses are a huge part of American history. And if you dig down into American history and you really getting to know the history of the Steens HMA and Stinking Water and Warm Springs, it's really, really cool, because you look back on the history of these, talking to these ranchers, finding out the history of their ranches and everything like that, and literally these Mustangs that are in these HMAs are the horses that built America. Not just, French Glen. The Appaloosas in Warm Springs, those are horses that came from a rancher here, that his Appaloosa horses, Studs came in and stole his mares because he's close to 2 HMAs. Studs came in and steal his mares. So Appaloosa gets out into the HMA, and those were well-bred ranch stock horses that worked hard to build that life for that rancher. Stinking Water HMA is known for its size. And a lot of people are like, how come Stinking Water horses are so big? Like, literally, there is horses on that HMA that look like Brabant breed and Percherons. Why are they so big? They didn't just naturally get that way. Just from self-regulation and breeding, because there's no breeding plan for them. It's because a rancher back in like the 50s, finally he had teams of Percheron and Belgian mares for haying his pastures. And he finally got a tractor. His draft horses were his main source of work for his hay operation. And when he got tractors, turned those mares out, which, yes, it is illegal, but, it was back in the friggin' 50s, and the guy's dead now. What are you going to do about it? But turn those mares out into that HMA, and now you got friggin' mustangs that are 17 hands tall, legs that are this big around, and feet like this. Those horses are descendants of the horses that built that guy's ranch that he made a living off of. Those horses are descendants of those Percheron mares that made a living for that man. You think about the Army remount horses. You got, each HMA, I tell people all the time, is very distinctive. There's different characteristics for each HMA, and it all depends on what domestic influence has gotten into that HMA over the years and how it has built that HMA to be where it is. It took Stinking Water horses from being like 14 hands tall to being 17 hand tall, feet this big, Belgian looking Percheron built horses. All because of a guy turned out his draft mares into that HMA because he didn't want to take care of them anymore. Those are descendants, just like I said, descendants of the horses that built that guy's lifestyle, that got him, he made a living off of and was able to get enough money to get a tractor so he didn't need them anymore. People don't understand that. People don't, I tell this when people say, you just hate Mustangs, you just want them desecrated. I don't hate them. I love them. They're a huge part of American history, and these horses, these Mustangs, are descendants of the horses that America was built on. I love them. They are so cool. The history of these horses, the way that they've lived their lives, the fact that there's feral horses that are descendants of the horses that America was built on, just blows my mind. I think that is so cool. And the last thing I want to see is those horses die off and starve to death because we won't manage them. Thank you guys for joining me today. I really appreciate it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry it was a little lengthy, but I got real passionate about it. So if you like it, go ahead and subscribe.